Hello, America and species, body of volume. This is about volume slash S is exceptions, exception nature, and demonstration of the same thing. How we're increasingly we are systems other than that was we were revealed naturally as before criminal foreign influences took over sciences in semi-ancient times. Nature has been demonstrating other since semi-ancient times, but a hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise method, singular, knew it could create nature demonstrating what it did, causing the sciences and or human fact cheaping nature qualities and aspects rather, therefore simultaneously the sciences. Blaming other things, others, ourselves when in response has fact cheaping nature, qualities, aspects of nature, wrongly, and then defending that simultaneously where and how a breaching method was caused, it was the real cause of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures that had been sustained, and of motivations with the people brought into this, where and how originally instilled that which was, quote, criminally foreign influence, unquote, became. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a police force, I'm not a criminal, not a judge, not a prosecutor. It is hyper evidential. There are all kinds of hyper evidential proofs per where and how all were victim predators, A through Z, differentially criminally foreign influence. And part of the proofs of that is because many ways it never went away. And how it never went away is that which is actually recorded. See, but other than what is actually recorded, it was pretended recorded into databases since before our founders were even born. Thank God, since the founders of other countries were even born. So, what to do where their wars are manifest, like in Ukraine, is to receive that as species bleeding, species body, because relevant to that and how everyone, countries A through Z, forced to be victims that were forced to blame other things, others, ourselves, and defend this at each age of fact cheaping nature, at each location, area, and state, overtly slash insidiously, criminally foreign influenced. That is distinct from saying overtly and insidiously. This is where how we are inherent, active, and progressive simultaneously value. What really is going to cause positive and negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. What really could afford discernment that our founders actually left us like this to tell all modern countries. But how, where, and how, in other words, they're creating fake exceptions, exception nature. There were men and women recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with identity theft fraud. In other words, taking a picture of kids and themselves next to each other to pretend they know each other so they can invest like simple instances roles like that. Instances relevant to where and how computers actually work and where and how the value of sequence data, evidence, and simultaneous value, and I'm identity value, reception is actually manifest. It has actually been manifest, which distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously is relevant to where it is finite, active, and progressive, bound, and not. So we can see what is simultaneously true always, not denying the slightest exception or not. Emotions are functional only when the fact cheaping nature has come through sciences that are not tactically, criminally foreign influence, let alone self-valued that way. Because the breaching method knew that its uses of humanity from that point in some ancient times, reliant upon syntax narratives, linguistic narratives of each of the sciences individually grouped and together, being and having been used remotely, like the victim predator voices of the bodies, of locations, areas, and states, every single individual grouped and together from every location. There are revelations by what and how. Jim Crow laws where I manifest. There are revelations that you can't appreciate unless you understand where and how the Civil War was manifest. Unless one understands how the War of 1812 was manifest and how they got away with pretending other, how they got away with self-valued roles with uses of the most knowledge about that to blame other things, others, ourselves for what the breaching method caused. That which had complete remote possession of colonization itself, its individual grouped and together identity, has complete possession of the identity of value progression that humanity is in its conjunction naturally / hypernaturally, which is where and how it is. For example, nature's nature distinct from nature. Each nature has what is positive or negative to itself, and then what is further positive or negative to itself, and has what is the identity that is inseparable as your own, as each identity is. Relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. But now it is through the filter of systems tactically ulterior from that one which is hypernatural, which is why and how we are individuals grouped and together, and how there are exceptions in exception to nature and demonstration of the same thing. So America and all those other countries around Russia and Ukraine, certain type of victim was never shown to anything, how remote uses of defenses of qualities of fact-keeping nature, aspects of fact-keeping nature, as criminal insidiousness, criminally legalized, and self-value being and having been criminally legalized, where and how this was sophistication here and there and everywhere where the species body is, since before each modern nation's leaders, and they were forced to hide the secrets of identities of law that can't defend themselves and their secrets and their uses of their own names and worth and others simultaneously and afford the revelations and the value of them per what, for example, those questions like what was the Civil War about? What is war about? The hypercolonization and in the subjugation of the indigenous persons by the British Empire is still holding back human progress. See, before countries A through Z were forced and are forced, and while they're forced, they're not simultaneously to use, to make opinions and convictions. This method knew that it had all locations as a certain type of theater of everywhere the species body is. So we see the British Empire was way bigger than Little England, but it could stay the same way Rome, the same way the church is way bigger than Rome, because these are elements of when from before the sciences became criminally foreign influenced. Our differences were self-valued. There were means to discern the hyper invisible, but still discernible, and to understand it really, how really what's going to cause really evolution's fruits and gifts, means from nowhere, and where we are syntactically manifest And so how we are tactically manifest. So I am not a journalist. I'm not a licensed journalist. But this is we have to have hyper journalism, because since founding, the journalism hasn't been in collusions with where and how the branches of government were differentially criminally foreign influenced, but increasingly, and that was used remotely by as for collusion slash S with what it already had collusions with at all locations, but it had everyone blaming other things, others themselves, even Native Americans. This had been sustained against Native Americans, had been perfected as colonization before it was colonization. And while it was colonization, distinctly, not distinctly, and simultaneously making, measuring, and maintaining people propagated as fact, human nature styles blaming what it caused on other things other than themselves, while as colonization. So we simplify things, and we solve things wrong. And it's overtly slash insidiously still, because free speech is prevented at location. Would you listen? Barbara, hi Barbara Root. How are you? So this was about, in other words, right now is the spring. Yeah, I'm listening to you, Barbara. If you would like to speak about anything. So this is the spring. Excuse me. This is the spring, summer, fall, winter. Know how it sounds better? Spring, summer, winter, fall. Now this is relevant. For example, where the sciences differentially, especially critically, share an identity relative, especially critically rather, share an identity relative to that which is hyper simultaneous, that which is the value of wisdom. So, for example, the reason that our journalists were supposed to tell the truth and or tell lies, but there are exceptions and exception to that. There are rules that they denied because of the hierarchies. For example, having them attach people to fake words, and the significance of that has been missed because they've been attaching people on off campuses to a method of identity theft slash fraud slash slander method role, where and how this thing confesses to us the breaching method to each individual grouped, every difference and all together, confessed being and having been assigned values that had nothing to do with that. But per this method, they knew syntactically to discern that we would have to use each other's names. We'd have to use each other's colors. It assigned these colors other than they are actually manifest to be in demonstration of. And that also simultaneously hyper-evidential, because simultaneously other was opined and theorized and pretended honestly with passions and emotions too. But in other words, had we let free speech, its finite voices, one finite voice, and have we tried to interpret them, knowing that and how there are limits, and even where people excel, all that was employed. Roles with treatments of insidious positives and negative treatments, time treatments, used simultaneously, too fast, too slow, at formal locations that were our in collusion with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, in that which other countries, archetypal criminal enterprises, in that which is hyper criminal, criminally foreign influence, so to speak. So I don't even have to be a lawyer. So what is actually recorded is where and how they use phrases like war crimes. They're using that with where and how while simultaneously self-valuing where and how countries are individually grouped in together, being and having tactical ulterior as systems tactical ulterior syntactically, therefore, from where and how we are actually individually grouped and together bound, and not. The species is one identity of bodies, individual, distinctly from how it is ground locations, ages, areas, sexes, part of its volume science is alpha or yang. Part of its volume slash yang. These are additive to each other. What's multiplicative or divisive is can only be and stay hyper additive. Earth's difference, for example, relative to the rest of space slash existence. I forgot how I was connected to this. Can't go back and rewind so later. But so Barbara Root and everybody else. Vaccines of campus elves, of Santa's elves, rather. One way, not heard since some ancient times, so no one even knows if the Santa Claus will work because no one ever tried. Because no one knew how to try it. And wherever one tried, if any individual or group tried, they just attach you to fake words. For example, when someone tries to demonstrate uses of where and how, also simultaneously relevant and relative, no. See, we have a theory of relativity. We have, for example, with the Oscars and Chris Brown, not Chris Brown, sorry, Chris Brown. Chris Rock and Will Smith treatments. See, people are making opinions and convictions, theories, but they're preventing us from demonstrating what is actually being and having been recorded before that. Where and how everyone, A through Z, had recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Not only roles with the breaching method, but uses by it where everyone was blaming other things, others, ourselves, for what it caused, like slavery. That was entrenched here before our founding parents were even born, and they had to hide their roles with it. So an expert on history self-values that being and having been hit by self-valuing. Well, this is how I was trained to be. Use knowledge. In other words, one can't understand any one of our founders if they don't understand how they had to counter extort themselves. And everyone was layers of extortion as natures of slavery, relevant to the extortion parts of it, non-distinctly, discernible through where distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, everyone was blaming other things other than themselves for that. And how syntactically manifest, therefore functionally. So it was preventing wisdom, its voice. Also, where they put wise guy as a phrase, all uses of words and phrases. So this is uses of Italian identities, uses of Irish identities, uses of English identity. Know how the language is named after the country. And no one remembers the history of English properly. So there are things I didn't read about English that it is asking to speak and to have spoke, not verbally, as it is actually manifest. its parts as they are actually to be perceived, received, and projected, told, understood. So Adam looks more like the subject and Eve looks more like the verb. For example, and even more so than that, constantly where they are connected sequence slash simultaneous nature of the human volume science. That how there are 1/3/5 identities of sequence slash simultaneous nature as exceptions in exception in nature in demonstration of the same thing about how they're only one. But we can only perceive this from and as an extent of its volume from inside the extent of its volume. But as its volume, but distinctly, because it is to its complete self, distinctly from outside of, not in other words, most of itself is outside of physics. Some of it is inside of physics hyper simultaneously. And the value of that only increasing is simultaneously relevant to this. So, for example, the top of the Z points back towards A, where from the bottom up, evolution's fruits and gifts, temporary positive is forced, can't help but be, but to an extent of complete possession over all parts of space, nature slash existence was a perfect value progression from before the smallest finite particle of physics was generated. So manifest. And then it was, and while it is, being distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously itself not as matter, then while as matter, and or as an identity of relativity to that matter, distinctly with it there distinctly from without it there, and distinctly as that which was as the value gained from that simultaneously. To study this, we must understand its identity of volume, where volume equals value as nature slash nature as value. This is the one identity of truth that no one could use for a lie. Note how a criminal insidiousness nature. People involved with those crazy laws that had been entrenched in America since before it was founded, and still to many ways. They have that and blamed on our founders in our faces through our schools. Simultaneously, they counter subjects' treatments, which are multi-front brought up, and counter treatments that leave out exceptions in exception nature. For example, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN, and Connecticut News, locations, and their members individually grouped and together, and their family members, and where they go home to, and their sources, interbranch, and everyone else. Their interbranch sources in themselves, differentially but increasingly remotely criminally foreign influence, where and how collusions were originally instilled, not just relative to the subject treatment of slavery as forced conceived, for us to respond to it syntactically, no other than it was actually having been conceived. was how they forced by the laws for people to conceive it syntactically, therefore functionally. Had nothing to do. See, they were assigning values to what was actually manifest. Simultaneously, they were assigning where and how nature itself demonstrates its hyper invisible identity, for how identity has relativity to positive and negative simultaneously. So the science is individually grouped in together, where they are criminally foreign influence right now as victims, but as victim predators. So, and relative to where and how we are not okay, there we are prevented from demonstrating how victims, because people will make opinions and convictions as sequence shifting roles, where and how at all locations, areas, and states outside of formal locations like interbranch, all private tied to them. They are preventing people free speech and the quality of fact-keeping nature for and uses of the revelations that wisdom is capable of having and actually has to all locations, areas, and states, and then further to them further formally as manifest. And all that was again woven again to all identity ground locations. And that was sustained against Native Americans and against the colonists, and individually grouped together. All those countries involved with those six things in the planting of people, everyone was being and having been used remotely. All identities of sophistication / non-sophistication. These are people now as manifest as they were then, manifest as arrays of opinions, of responses to formally or in collusion timed with overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and that insidiousness from people A through Z. Like, for example, they blame, even when people blame things on politics, people are recollecting what was actually said, and people are pretending things are recorded at interbranch locations. And the only reason they got away with this so long is for how, as victim predators, being and having been used remotely since they were kids. Now, for example, painted into corners, making all kinds of exceptions and faking, extents of them. That, in other words, there's a Paul Apted. I never had a conversation with him in my life. He's one of the ones involved, and you're not supposed to record police forms. By accident, I recorded police forms and judges and prosecutors involved with a whole bunch of other countries. And they're actually discernible souls relevant to this. Wire crime acts and methods, where used, being and having been used remotely, the same way the overt criminal enterprises, killers, child abusers, and roles with that insidiousness, people A through Z, like politics, that have nothing to do with the politics part of it. But the branches of government individually grouped and together are being and having been used remotely, individually grouped and together. And where and how their exception nature is as those things that, like, the services people tied to them, the databases tied to them, the military, and people's opinions A through Z. We too are exception nature to them, which are originally still differentially but increasingly criminally foreign influence, employed motivations other and fake mixed and delusions mixed, per their roles blaming other things, others, ourselves for what that breaching method caused and for what it was doing, how it maintained everyone blaming other things other than ourselves, and how to maintain that to collusions, and maintain, propagate consciously juxtaposed natures of organized crime, specifically leveraged against each difference, like age, at each location, area, state. This is a breaching method that has North and South slavery entrenched by itself, by a method that would have been even worse. We never would figure this out if we ever allowed to have it told to us properly. One can't understand American history until they understand how everyone was afraid to speak and how they were forced to pretend other by our founders, to counter-extort them. And one has to use what is hyper-evidential. For example, where and how they assigned black/white. That means any color and clear. To keep worse than obfuscated that which is actually clear and that which is hyper simultaneous. And so what to do is to conceive it as the speed. So when they're blaming, what they're saying, oh, this is what we want to do. We're gonna punish in court. They're simultaneously valuing courts that were never capable of speaking for the law. They are involved with physical delusions. Criminally, they're the people with the ad placements on the networks. This is relevant to where and to how the branches individually grouped and together were and are corrupt, used criminally for an influence as victim predators, though, purely. Then they had to hide that because the methods they use are also being and haven't been used remotely. So this propagated roles with corruption individually grouped and together, bound and used remotely. But it was also used remotely for what had nothing to do with all that corruption. But to keep that and everyone with that needing to blame other things, others, ourselves for the collusion/S, more subtle /overt at all locations, areas, and states. See, this method knew that it was going to have to keep the breaching method as the answer /S to our questions. Blamed on other things, others, ourselves, apparently, and keeping that self-value because nature's continually demonstrating, trying to demonstrate it as that. So they have ad companies with. You ever hear how many side effects they promote with the drugs they put on there? Because they have lawyers with the interbranch. Now, this is some of the ways exceptions. So there are 3 branches of government, and then there are exceptions in exception nature that assume their complete and identity. And it is each of us, not just more importantly than where and how we vote, is where and how we enable reception of the statutes and precedents, liberated from having been used remotely, criminally for an influence, and delusions wrought, and that screened by people blaming other things, others, or themselves. That really which was hurting each age of correlation nature, no wisdom. So what's black and white and clear has been long obfuscated here. So there's in other words, they also there's a pattern of people who lie to girls. They have connections between themselves. And then they may try to film a fake exception pretending to know me as people connected to my kindergarten class I went to, and the school closed right after that. the students, the teachers, and their kids. So they're keeping people as victim predators where they're painting fake things into databases. Then people have apparent legitimate reasons to pretend they're angry against us violently and or insidiously too, individually grouped in together, which is again relevant to where and how. Differentially increasingly. The peak sophistication / non-sophistication, even of our most sophisticated, they are kept needing to hide the same sequence shift, finite, active, progressive lies. Denial of the value of sequence truth and of the quality of fact treatment, nature, time treatments that allow this to be established. So there's a former Mayor Gold, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously when I was an adult and when I was a kid. Recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, involved with federal crimes with locations next to parks and next to schools and on off campuses where they affect arrays individually grouped and together of responses to positive and negative treatments, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, and also just totally made up, and everyone forced to use each other's names that way. For uses of sense and sensibility, for example, use Jane Austen's phrase, but for formal uses of such phrases, of such the worth of such phrases in ways that increasingly can't afford. Such uses, phrases in literature to be grounded by anyone to wisdom's actual course, which is how there's one identity of value progression that we could only discern of through part of its we have an extent of complete possession over means to discern its complete extent, the extent of its complete possession over all parts of space / existence, and where and how it is only increasing as value, and where and how it is forced as evolution's fruits and gifts here, means out of nowhere, where we are fact treatment nature, for example, as the top of the Z forces back towards A, this perfect value progression. Evolution, it's positive where it can make more positive onto itself also, where it is simultaneously possession, where it is simultaneously an identity of possession over all parts of space / existence. Every identity, therefore every identity of possession, is relativity to what is positive and to negative simultaneously. And neutrality is a distinct identity of positive and or relative to the denial of its course, where it is a continually being completed positive here as evolution's course, its fruits and gifts and means, for example, in demonstration of it, or as them forced from here, leads of ID, forced space nature transfer, the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. But this hyper-archetypal breaching method, it got people to blame the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and nature, other things, other results, and to simultaneously defend that as simultaneous defenses of fact, treatment, nature, qualities, and aspects that can't defend themselves and afford, for example, criminal insidiousness to be discerned. That phrase relevant to what really is honestly and properly telling American history or any country's history. See, but this method knew that we wouldn't be able to do that without blaming other things other than ourselves, because they built all kinds of, quote, experts, unquote, as the nature of the law experts and the physics of the law experts are left out, exceptions, exception nature. Again, where functionally and how you can't invent faked exceptions and exception nature because these are distinct. In other words, a sequence nature is a distinct identity of simultaneous nature. As an individual of the species body, you are a sequence nature, but slash simultaneous nature. Could go further to say slash simultaneous nature slash sequence nature. Distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, because one identity is distinct to all volumes of itself, including where it is greater than and more finite than what is being and having been generated, where all parts of space slash existence individually grouped and together go also with two other identities of sequence slash simultaneous nature. Identities are one identity of volumes, identity of relationship to itself as its identity of relationship to its plural identity. And demonstration is the same thing as the parts of your body are semi-nature relationship to your complete identity. So English was real to be led by that which is itself constantly as a number of things. And itself staying constantly, like for example, it is constantly forever nature. It is constantly, only the extent that it is debatable, and where and how they debate such things and get away with debating what is not debatable is also evidential, hyper-evidential, how that is used remotely and how maintained the motivations. We have to go to each age of fact, nature, each nature of campus simultaneously, how that is being and having been used remotely by that method that knew that people would blame the real cause of negative value nature progressions, action natures on other things other than themselves, while increasingly valuing simultaneously that having been. So being in stayed manifest is our styles of logic A through Z, opinion slash conviction nature slash delusions raw, blaming other people, others, or selves. When they hear people speaking about things before problems happen, like wars, they had experts that speak for the nature of the law or for the physics of the law, that deal with groupings, that deal with uses of elements with logic, like, for example, values with logic, like colonization, and they're like the identities of the countries involved with it, like England, like Spain, France. They wasn't just them using remotely the colonies of America, North and South, with slavery entrenched. It was the legal, physical legal, and nature legal people with Africa and Asia too. And so, in other words, they're pretending that it's only their motivations for propaganda, hyper propaganda, etc. This is a method that left and maintains measured self-value, where and how we have no legal representation, that has not used criminally foreign influence, qualities of fact-keeping nature, aspects of fact-keeping nature, and self-value illusions told about other things involved with the sense and sensibilities of everybody. Where and how there are only three branches of government, and this includes where and how it can only be through us. They're over there where it's too late. In other words, we're supposed to follow them. If we see mandated law being followed, we see them unwise, not smart, stupid, delusions raw, and getting away with it, for example, by pretend because they're educated. We have to deal with real premises, treatments. We have to deal with exceptions, exception nature, where and how it is. The hyper simultaneous as value. Just begin with even simultaneous as value, and see the value of sequence truth before the order of the finite now. For example, how could someone interpret the physical values of the republic for which we stand as interpreted to us without interpreting the value of why it is president / chief, incapable of mixing volumes, but one way, same way, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. The difference between men and women is in demonstration of the identity of volume that humanity is, that is greater than that individually and grouped as the complete volume, and it is simultaneously more finite than it. While as the same identity as the order of that is the value of the order of the finite. In other words, each nature has what is positive or negative to itself. So what we should do when we do syntactically, we conceive this as manifest. The war between Russia and Ukraine is manifest in demonstration of a hyper-archetypal human fact-keeping nature breaching method. There was also recorded simultaneously relevant how blame the other things, others, ourselves, was what that breaching method caused. This is manifest where people make opinions / convictions and with delusions regarding isms like communism, capitalism, socialism. One of the ways they got away with this is pretending it's only per military significance. Meanwhile, our military on off Central Connecticut State University, on off Trinity College, there's Eric Oliveri, who's one of the people involved with who confirmed a whole bunch of people tied to him, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. I never saw him on my street when I was a kid outside of a car, and that wasn't even until after he graduated. So there's an Eric Oliveri and others on and off the state judicial branch offices being and having been used remotely. There's a Christelle Fair who made a fake exception pretending to know me. They in the suburbs, there's like a few you don't see, you don't know people. They pretend other by making exceptions, and with fake ones too, like with the Joshua Julie, who's also involved with the news media, with our differentially criminally foreign influence, differentially increasingly. And so where and how they're moving to justify where they spoke for the nature of the law and or for the physics of the law / physics of the law. If I say A and B, that's reference to two things. If I say A / B, that's reference to three things. And the reason I do this is because those are three distinct identities of sequence / simultaneous nature. The order of the finite, the order of what is active actually here, as we are actually here active, value, and the order of what is progressive value, already here. It has yet to come, but it is already here. Again, as evolution's fruits and gifts and means from nowhere. And that is science / S. And, so mandated law wasn't as offensively forbid. These are people with wire crime action methods with the phones, with the locations of the interbranch, and all exception nature, formal and informal tied to them. And informal, that means the people A through Z. This is a method that makes people speak bad about the police, and then they pretend that people are speaking bad about the police. In other words, they are the police, but they've been lying, and they've been used criminally for and influenced. It has only been gotten away with because of how they've been used as victim predators. Now, we have to understand how sickly, distinctly, multi-front, simultaneously and sequentially, where we are syntactically manifest. There are collusions with the wire crime acts and methods also that are furthered at locations, as collusions with way worse method tied to that, regardless of who's it wasn't the when people have logic to say, oh, it wasn't the fault of me though, slavery. It's a frustrated logic that is associated with questions and answers relevant to where and how other things, others, or selves were blamed for the breaching method caused, let alone while the hyper-evidential is increasingly demonstrating that, for increasingly how forsaken are American citizens, increasingly simultaneously, sickly distinctly, they lie about how they feel they're tough, and they lie about how they feel they're delicate, simultaneously, sickly distinctly, and simultaneously too, because that's being and having been used, for example, relevant to where and how remotely the breaching method maintains each identity, ground, location, area, and state. Therefore, leader's voice, no matter how powerful they get, everywhere the species volume is, people, can't go back and afford discern that which is actually hyper-evidential. So I'm not a journalist, I'm not a licensed journalist, but also hyper-evidential was actually recorded on means to show wire crime acts and methods with the phones and with the cameras and the news stories as collusions at the locations as crime scenes, and relevant to where and how this was a hypercrime scene, relevant to the breaching method that used people, colonists A through Z. Additionally to where and how using them is that increasingly not native pure. Thank you. Sure. Vaccine. Hi, Margaret.